Neil Gourley, welcome to the Running Effect podcast. How are you? I would say afternoon. It's probably evening in Switzerland. What's the time there?
Yeah, it's just about 9 p.m. here in Saint Moritz, where I'm spending my time just now, kind of heading into Paris. This is where I'll be for the next month. So yeah, getting on for bedtime, but yeah, I've been enjoying the sort of quiet mountain life up here.
What's the energy like? A month before the Olympics, picking up steam, British champion. We'll get into all of that. What's the energy and focus up there right now?
So it's a case at the moment of having a couple of races lined up pretty soon, which are important, but trying not to get too fixated on those that are coming up. You know, the big goal is the Olympic Games in Paris. Having qualified, I need to do absolutely everything I can to make sure that that's where I get my performance, my best performance this season. And that's in 4 weeks' time. So August 2nd, I'll line up in the Olympics. First round of the 1500 meters is August 2nd, as I said. And at the moment, really, I'm just trying to improve upon where I already was in terms of this season. I've only raced a few times so far. I came into the season maybe a little later than I usually would, coming off some injuries. But yeah, the focus was really just to keep building on the levels we've already kind of got to at this point.
British champion. What was it like to hear those words? How long have you been working for that going into the Olympics? Obviously, it matters and means a lot any year, but specifically the Olympic year, I'm sure it means a little bit more.
Yeah, becoming British champion was really, a big goal of mine. The qualification for the Olympics was the biggest kind of takeaway from the British Championships. That was the most important part. But I was coming in kind of as defending champion, so I had that date kind of circled in the calendar as, look, let's qualify for the Olympics. But also, it was important to sort of retain my title there. It's not something to be taken lightly, particularly the way that 1500 meter is in the UK at the moment. It's so strong. So I was going in with the mentality kind of the whole time of, look, we need to go there and win this thing. Whether that was, achievable or not, that was the mentality the whole time. I knew that was going to be a great challenge. And the personnel kind of varied. At some points, we thought, these people were going to be lining up. The goalpost changed. It was other people, but you can only kind of be racing against who you're put up against. And becoming British champion, no matter who was lining up, was the goal last weekend.
Can you speak to how stacked England is and Great Britain is at the 15 distance? I think it gets talked a lot about in the US, and I know people like Josh have brought up the debate, you guys versus the US in the 15, who would win. But I mean, making the team is truly, like I think both the trials in the US and where you come from, Great Britain, like the trials are almost like in the Olympics in its own form. Like it's just so competitive to even make a final. Can you speak to that? And what are the nerves and pressure at that event, at that race, where you kind of have to have it on the day to make the race that you want to make your big goals come true?
Yeah, I think the US has caught up a lot in the past few years, particularly this year. They have a team now that is very much comparable. I mean, in the past, I think it was definitely tougher to make a British team, but now it looks, sort of on par almost. It's gotten to that level in the US, and there'll be peaks and troughs with that. It'll go up and down, but yeah, going back to the pressure of the situation itself, it's kind of going into it that you need to have your best performance on that day. If you're below par, you're not going to be on that team. It's different from a lot of countries where perhaps, if you're running the qualifying time, you're pretty much going to be competing in the Olympics, or at least if you've got that qualifying time and you're one of the best athletes in the world, your place is going to be pretty assured. It's not the case in the UK. We've been leaving some of the better runners in the world at home in recent years. That's the way it's gone. But yeah, I kind of feel like I rise to that pressure. I get the most out of myself when these pressure situations are really on. And I think it's sort of driven higher and higher standards within the UK. I don't think it's a coincidence that as Scottish guys have kind of pushed each other on to the point that we know it's difficult even just to be showing up at the major championships. So if that's the baseline level, just to be making your championship and it's already this level, and we're fighting just to be on that plane, then yeah, these higher standards are only going to breed higher and higher standards.
British champ this year. You've run 3:47 in the mile at pre. We can get into kind of the build up that went into that, a little more unideal than usual. You wouldn't think, maybe you wouldn't run 3:47 off of that. What do you feel like makes this year different than previous years? You're coming into form at just the right time. You're dangerous. As we've seen the past 2 years, you don't really want to mess with the Brits going into a final 1500 with what's happened the past 2 years. And you look like you could be that guy the third year. What's different about this year?
This year's been very different, and it's not all positive, to be honest. Certainly the way it started out, I kind of came off World Championships last year looking for ways that I could claw that kind of gap between where I was, which in the World Champs last year was ninth, to the point where I'm winning medals, or winning the race is the ultimate goal. Winning on that global stage is something I haven't done yet. It's what the goal is. I sat down with my coach and a few others at the end of the season looking for ways we could do that. And then, if I'm honest with you, in the fall, into the winter, that plan all went to smithereens, put it that way. The plan went to, I just don't know if you're comfortable with me swearing on the
No, you
podcast,
can
but
go
you know what
for
I'm trying to say here. The plan went to shit, is what I'm saying. You know what I'm saying. And I spent kind of all of October and November injured with a pubic stress reaction, as well as osteitis pubis in that area, which is a kind of notoriously tricky injury to navigate. And we were doing that all the way through to kind of December, when I kind of got running again properly and built back up what we kind of knew was a calculated risk in building back up for indoor season. The reason I did that is because World Indoors were in Glasgow, which is my hometown. So Glasgow were hosting World Indoors, and if it was kind of anywhere else in the world, I don't think I would have done indoors, but it was a calculated risk to line up there. I had actually already qualified for it, being the World Indoor Tour champion from the previous year. So there was no need to show up at trials, anything like that. I had the wild card spot. But unfortunately in February, probably as a result of building up quite quickly, but also just, an injury that I've never had before was a sacral stress reaction. And that happened in early February, kind of in the few weeks leading up to those British Championships, when things had actually started to go really well. They were turning for the better, to the point that I thought I had a great chance of winning those championships in Glasgow. But I was unfortunately faced with a second bone stress injury of my career. I had had none until the two recent ones I've had in this past year. So that kind of took me out in terms of running. February, March into April was when I started running again. But during that time, things looked so differently, in that I was cross training a really kind of high level in terms of how much volume I was doing. It's something I'd gotten experimental with because of the time in October, November. I found that there was a lot I could do, but having had that time, I knew that I would be able to push it on a bit in terms of what my body was able to cope with. So there's high volumes of training, mainly on the bike. Certainly for all the intensity, I was on the bike, and I was doing, long threshold efforts, often kind of twice in a day, a few times a week, basically. And in between that, just a high volume of cross training in general. It was a bit experimental, but at the same time, I knew that I'd be able to handle more volume of training than I would running, because cycling, time in the pool, it doesn't beat your legs up quite like it does when you're running and doing that volume. So that was a gamble, but seemed to pay off when I eventually did get running again. And although it took a good 6 weeks to feel right again, the aerobic fitness and the aerobic side of things just developed at a rate that I didn't kind of appreciate. I didn't realize was going to happen. So it, although was a kind of really difficult period, there was maybe a bit of a blessing in there, and it allowed me to push things on in that respect. And it gave me maybe an aerobic edge that I hadn't had before, but would much rather have been running. But at the same time, didn't set me back as much as I thought, and resulted in that mile race at Pre, which really kind of, yeah, took me by complete surprise. I was in disbelief at that because I just didn't feel like I'd done enough on the track yet to warrant anything like that kind of thing.
How full circle is it in reflection of this past year to even be sitting here with me talking about the Diamond Leagues you're going to attack, talking about 347, talking about winning a British Championships, going to the Olympics? What would that version of yourself in the fall who was dealing with those stress fractures think of how far you've come just in less than a year?
Yeah, yeah. If you told me this in March or in November when things were really difficult and I was struggling physically, but also struggling mentally, to be honest with you, there were days where I thought this was not out of the question, but I knew I was extremely against the odds, put it that way, this year. I knew that the odds were going to be stacked against me, and I didn't think I had enough time to get to exactly where I wanted to be. Thankfully, those negative thoughts, I was wrong. I did have enough time, but what really did it was that from early March, really through to now, I don't think I can point to a day between then and now that hasn't gone, 99% to plan. It's been something been working on psychologically, actually. I started working with a sports psychologist back in November, and we kind of found that often my approach was that I had a date circled in a calendar, whatever that would be. Whenever I was looking to peak, it could be the British Championships, it could be the World Championships, whatever it was. And I felt like training would kind of pass me by almost. I'd do all of this work and I wouldn't remember any of it. It would all be a bit of a blur. And it's almost like it was all just for that one moment, which it is to an extent, but I wasn't taking any stock in what I was doing on a day-to-day basis, really. So I started sort of living and training more to get everything I could out of that one day. The next day didn't matter, the previous day didn't matter. It was just about an accumulation of days. And the days I've had between early March and now, like I said, I've 99% gone to plan, and I don't think it's any coincidence that that's the way I've been framing it. I completely lost sight of where I needed to be. Like I wasn't nervous going into pre because I just knew that I'd successfully navigated every single day between then and that race. And although it was intimidating, it should have been really intimidating coming up against the best guys in the world, I really wasn't worried about the result at all because there's nothing I would have changed about the last kind of 6-8 weeks leading into that. So that was a bit freeing in a sense, and that's the approach I've tried to take, is that if we accumulate as many days that 90 to 100% are what I wanted, the way I wanted to execute them, then there's absolutely no reason to be anxious and no reason to be, fearing the worst about a race. I changed that kind of psychologically this year, and I think it helped, particularly in the lower moments when I was struggling with thinking, I am so far behind where my competitors are.
I think there are a lot of people who think in order to reach their goals, they have to hit every single day and everything has to go perfectly according to plan. I think you're a testament of this year that that's not the case. Could you speak to maybe a high school or D1 collegiate athlete listening who has that mindset and they hear what you just said and they think, wow, maybe I don't need to get too stressed about everything going perfectly according to plan to hit my goals. Maybe there is a different way.
Absolutely. It's something I still wrestle with as well. And I have kind of, pretty recently in my career, is I always thought, I don't know if I'm talented enough. I don't know if I can spot other people these days of training that I've missed. I don't think that I'm talented enough to make it up. There's such a mistake that most athletes do, and it's funny that just about every athlete thinks that way to some extent. Doubts can come in, and it's important. I've found there's been a realization that things don't need to go perfectly in order to have, the desired end result in the season, the desired end result today, the desired end result in the next 6 weeks. Things don't need to have gone perfectly. If they've gone perfectly, so much the better, but there's so much you can do if you focus on what can I do right now. with the cards that I've been dealt. Sometimes those cards, like went on in my winter, were pretty tough. There are other people that have had much tougher cards dealt to them, but it's a pretty powerful thing to sit down and think, right, what can I do today to improve myself, to make myself better, to take me closer to my goals, not where do I need to be in 8 weeks. You need to lose sight of that if there's a setback that's happened. Losing sight of that will free you up to succeed today. And I think that's the important takeaway that I've taken until 29 years old to realize. I'd much rather have learned that lesson sooner, but it's taken me this long to develop that kind of approach.
You put out a post over 2 years ago now at this point, and a lot of it was, in quotes, talking about what other people were saying about you, the doubts outsiders had about you. And I'll just read a quick line at the very end that you yourself shared. You said, "I suppose my point in this long, sappy post is that despite having plenty of people to prove wrong, there was nothing more special than proving my people right. It's so much more powerful, and it means everything to me." I'm sure you're taking that framework with you into this season as you've had setbacks, as there have been doubters. Could you speak more? I'm so curious about that line. Like, it's more about proving my people right and less about proving you guys wrong. I really like that.
Absolutely. That's something it's always been a mantra of mine, really, is that yes, there can be people in this sport that doubt you. It's a sport that sometimes sponsors get involved and kind of dictate how things go. Sometimes governing bodies, my own British Athletics, I've been in situations before where they've doubted me. I've been in situations where, people start to write you off in general in the sport because naturally people have a pretty short memory sometimes. And yeah, in 2021, I was injured and missed the Olympic Games. I tore my soleus a few times kind of in the run-in, and the sort of post you're referring to is the following year when, having had people doubt me, I was able to sort of, you know, for lack of a better term, prove them wrong, but that was never that powerful to me, if I'm honest. There were so many people in my corner when things were low that didn't stop believing in me and refused to accept that that was kind of the best I was ever going to do in this sport, and that was going to be it for me. There were so many people in my corner that believed that I would not only get back to the level I was, but also kind of exceed that. And you find out kind of in the low moments who really is in your corner and who does believe in you. And then when you get to prove those people right, when you get to hug those people and thank them for sticking by you, now that's powerful. That's more powerful than any amount of proving haters wrong could do. So that's something I latch on to, particularly in big races coming up, is just like thinking about the people that have been there for you and that are willing you on, seeing you, yeah, want to see you do well.
Obviously, you have high goals and expectations for this year, for this Olympics, I'm sure. But I think to a lot of outsiders, you are that underdog kind of dark horse going into this year's 15. And I think it's those guys that are always the most scary, at least to me from the outside, because I'm like, they have nothing to lose, right? Someone like Josh or Jakob, there's so much pressure, so much conversation that every move they make will be scrutinized one way or another. And it's always the guys I think that have very little to lose that end up doing really well. I think we saw that with Josh last year, with Jake 2 years ago. What's kind of do you embrace this kind of underdog mentality, or if not, why?
Yeah, I'd definitely much rather go in under the radar. There's no doubt about that. Josh, Jakob, the sort of main contenders are so for a reason. I mean, there's a reason why people are talking about those guys as being the favorites, and I'm quite happy for that to be the case. I haven't earned that right in my sort of major championship history for people to be talking about me as a favorite. That's okay. I feel like this year, although it was tough, like I've been talking about in the fall and the winter, could have been a blessing in disguise, and I definitely haven't reached my ceiling this year. I know I haven't reached my ceiling this year because I just haven't done enough work for that to be the case. It was kind of only in the lead into British Championships that we were able to do certain things um, in training that I just wasn't able to yet, or just hadn't built up to yet. So the good news is I haven't peaked yet because I just can't really have yet. And I think that's a little bit of a blessing in disguise in a sense. To answer your question, yeah, I'm completely happy to go in as an underdog, and I think that'll continue. There's a couple of races coming up here where I could change that narrative, but I don't think I'll be anything other than an underdog going into the Paris Olympics, which is totally fine by me. I'm excited at that prospect, and referring back to what I was talking about earlier, there's plenty of people that have been believing in me and what I can do. So it's about proving those people right, not necessarily proving people wrong that might be right in the previews or whatever it is that people latch onto when it comes to predicting what's going to happen at this Olympic 1500 meters.
As someone who's, in the sport, a competitor, races against these guys, analyzing the past few years of 15s at the championship world global stage level, what's your analysis on Jake winning, Josh winning? I mean, Jakob won the year before. It seems like a new guy always pops up. Can you speak to the aspect of, like, you have to have it on the day, and the margin that separates first from fourth is so dang small, and if you don't have it on the day, it's very hard to get it done.
Yeah, I mean the 1500 meters in general is an event where the margins are pretty slim. You do need to get it right on the day. There's no doubt about that. Not just physically, you need to be right on the day, but tactically as well. There's so many mistakes you can make in that event. So that's probably why you're seeing in the last few years you've had different champions, and it's not a case of one guy being dominant each of those years. It's more about who got it right at the right time. Like I said, preparation wise, tactically, all factors that play into consideration. There's a bit of a not predictability, but we kind of know the way the event's being run at the moment, more how the race is likely to go at the Olympics, more so than we used to. It used to be that races could often go much more tactically than they do now, but with the kind of caliber of athletes and the way people are tending to run the event, we kind of know a bit more about how that final is going to be run. It is going to be aggressive, particularly because of the way that Jakob likes to run races, particularly because of the way that Timothy Cheruiyot started running in 2019. I feel like that changed the whole game a little bit. People realized they could win from far out. And Tim, to his credit, was the first one to probably do that. In 2019 in Doha, he ran from the front at the gun and just didn't look back. Nobody could hang on. He started that, and Jakob, to an extent, has made that his own in the way that he usually winds up from pretty far out as well. So it's become the case that we know the Olympic final is going to be fast, just based on who will be involved in that race. And so it's a case of being ready, to handle 55, 56-second laps and then being able to kick off that. I don't think tactically it's that, it's not rocket science, is what I'm trying to say. Tactically, if you're there in the right place and you feel smooth running those 56-second laps, whatever it is, and you can close that last 3 to 100, 150, 100 meters, you're still fresh enough to close hard. That's what's going to, win the Olympics this year. It's so much easier said than done, because hanging on to, the pace that it's going to be is so much easier said than done. And you could, if you're fit enough to do it, it's, that's the real challenge, is what I'm trying to say. It's not tactically thinking, oh my goodness, how can I possibly negotiate this? It's right, how can we be prepared enough to handle that kind of pace and still being able to kick off of it? Because it's, as I said, it's a lot more easier said than done.
What would it mean to you to win the Olympics? I know, a lot's going to take to do it, but if you do it, looking back on this conversation, what would it mean?
I was about to say the cliched thing and to say it would mean everything. It wouldn't mean everything. What this sport has allowed me to do in my life is pretty incredible. I've traveled and seen things, and had the privilege of competing for my country that when I was younger I never thought I would do. So it's not like it would make or break my time in this sport, my career, my legacy, whatever you want to talk about. It wouldn't make or break that. What it would do is validate all the work and the reasoning behind so many of the things I've done in the last kind of 5 or 6 years, where I started to believe that getting to this level was a possibility. that started with my college coach Ben Thomas, who really believed in me and made me mentally, recognize that I could be world class and I could break through to those next levels, and has continued on to working with the group I do now and in Flagstaff in the Dark Sky, the Mission Run Dark Sky group based there. And we've got to the point now where we're thinking, look, we've achieved this, we've achieved that. Why sell yourself short than trying to, win a global championship, in this case, the Olympic Games? That has to be the goal for me because of what I've already done in this sport, but also just the way I've applied myself, I think, lends itself to believing that I can do it. There's so many decisions, and I won't call it sacrifices because it's just decisions that I've made kind of in my career, particularly lately, that, I wouldn't do if I wasn't trying to get to the very top of the sport. Just certain things apply yourself, and I don't call it sacrifices because I enjoy doing it, but certain things that, if you weren't looking to get to the top, if you're just happy being a professional athlete, maybe you wouldn't apply yourself in the same way. But yeah, it would be a validation of all those, difficult decisions and all the time away at training camps and all the hard work. I mean, it's not like I'm the only one working hard, but all the kind of tough times in the winter, all the decisions I was making when the cards dealt were pretty tough, those would be validated. And it's probably about validating those decisions and proving the people right that believed I could do it.
Talking about the brand who's made all of this possible, can you speak to Under Armour and specifically, and I've talked about this on a few podcasts with Under Armour athletes, just the shift that I'm sure you felt with Under Armour, the products. I've tried the shoes. I mean, they have really, I'm smiling about it because I'm like, I wore Under Armour shoes today out of my own choice. I get sent so many shoes by so many companies, and I just think they're the real deal. They're so good, but I think the public's view is like, oh, some guy ran a 347 at Under Armour spikes. What? But what I'm talking about. The real deal. So can you speak to one, like the products, and then also the company, them investing in the sport and even joining a group like Mission Run Dark Sky and kind of Vince running so well these days, just the whole crew, the whole group, the brand. Can you speak to all of it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a brand and a group, like you've talked about, our group, that's come a long way in a pretty short space of time. I think there are valid reasons that people don't realize kind of what we have in terms of footwear, in terms of apparel, in terms of our team as well. Just the metaphor fits all the way around. We have come from, I only joined the team 2.5 years ago, and it's kind of amazing the trajectory we've been on since. Within that Dark Sky team that I'm a part of, there's been a whole shift in culture where I think in the past, as much as there was some individual success, there's been a whole culture shift whereby we don't just want to be professional athletes. We don't just want to be doing this for a living. We want to, be really competitive on the international stage. We won't just settle for, representing the brand well and, maybe having a good race here or there. There's a whole attitude shift where the team knows that the standards need to be high and that we actually want to be successful on the international stage. That's kind of been reflected in the products and the footwear as well. Much the same way a couple of years ago, I don't think anybody will complain at me for saying this or get angry at me for saying this, that we weren't in as good a place as we are now. And the kind of quality of the products have changed significantly. The biggest difference you can see is in the footwear. The road shoes went from, not being competitive at all to something that, is probably as good, if not better, than what other brands have to offer. And the spikes have gone from a place where we're thinking, oh my goodness, we are behind other brands here. There's no doubt about this. What we have on our feet right now is behind. I know we have ambitions to get there, but we are behind, and we had to accept that. And they've gotten to a place now where I'd rather, if I was given the choice, I genuinely would put on the Under Armour spikes that we have now versus lining up in what a rival brand would have. I wouldn't change what I have on my feet just now in terms of spikes. And I know it's easy for me to sit here and say that, and in reality, it's hard for me to prove that because I am paid by Under Armour. They are my company, and they have been behind me this whole way. But yeah, you're just going to have to trust me on this one. That's exactly what I would lace up with, given the opportunity of whatever footwear I wanted to put on my feet. The spikes are really top end, and I prefer them to what other brands have. Just in the light testing I've done of yeah, in terms of comparison.
We've talked a lot about present day, you running 347, you winning British championships, but we haven't talked about the past. For those listening who are inspired by this year, let's give them some context to the Neil I'm talking to today. So in a nutshell, I'm sure this could be its own podcast in and of itself. Bring me up to speed from the moment you started running, your first impressions of it, all the way up to present day and how you got this far.
Yeah, I'll try not to give you too long-winded an answer for this one, but
I want a
I did
detailed
start when I
breakdown of
was
every race you've ever ran.
every race, every split. I started when I was about 10 years old and was nurtured into the sport by, at first, there was just a teacher that spotted some talent at a fun run, and I just found that exciting. I thought that, I was getting scouted for something. It seemed exciting at the time that someone recognized some talent in me, and I think because of that, I was just, excited to try it. But I had the perfect coach at that time initially, a woman, Claire Stevenson, who just made it fun. The sport was fun, and I was getting better at it, and I was enjoying it, and I was enjoying meeting with people. But that's all it really was at that point. And I've been lucky to have essentially three coaches since then that have just been the perfect people at every stage. A chap named Gordon Lockie, who sort of started to take things more seriously when I was, a teenager, and brought out the best in me at those age groups and was able to take it seriously. And we started realizing that we did have a bit of talent in it. I was never one of the top guys in my age group, to be honest. I was never one of the guys that could have just, made a professional career out of it, just coming through the ranks naturally in the UK. What happened was I wanted to go to the NCAA and see if I could make improvements. And at that point, I started working with Ben Thomas, coach of Virginia Tech, and coach to Vince, who I know you spoke to recently, and coaches Cole Hawker, Cooper Tier, and has coached, just so many great middle distance athletes. But he sort of instilled this kind of mental toughness within me. And just competing in the NCAA for him and with that team, I was lucky to be, on that team with some great people, including Vince, some people that went on to do some great things in the sport. And I think it was just, I consider myself so lucky to have had those correct people around, to have had the leadership that I did in Ben Thomas. And then from there on, to work with Stephen Haas and Flagstaff as well has just been perfect, because I'm now at the stage where I do kind of have some independence in the sport, and I know what works for me, and I've taken a lot of the stuff from Ben that I know works and taken it to Stephen, who doesn't have an ego about all of this and knows exactly what he's doing in terms of how we, train at altitude, and we can kind of get together on a weekly basis. And we've got to the point now between myself and Stephen that we have such a good understanding. We know what we want kind of week to week. We'll often have a call before we set it up, and it's almost like whoever's first to speak. So I was thinking this, and then he'd be like, no way, I was actually thinking the exact same thing, or vice versa. We've gotten this kind of weird understanding that we kind of know what we want at each point throughout the season. And I think we've kind of learned a lot from each other. He's been happy to take on board some of the things I've brought, and I've learned so much working with him, and not just working with him, but also different athletes on this same team that I've just really enjoyed working with, So that's been the kind of whole path I've been on in terms of being coached, in terms of being nurtured in this sport. And then in terms of just competing itself, I've been someone that's gotten better kind of just about every year. I've been chipping away. I've never had these like big flashy improvements, I would say. But I'm someone who's 29 now and hasn't had a year where, I feel I haven't gotten better. So that's an exciting part. I don't feel like I've hit my ceiling yet. At some point I will, but it's not yet. And I think that's an exciting prospect because sometimes people have been surprised when I've done this or that in a race or a championship. But it's been nice that it's just been slow progress over the years. And eventually, if you're just having the slow progress, or at least consistent progress over a number of years, it's yeah, it's a tough thing to stop, I suppose, if the train keeps rolling like that. I never consider myself someone that was talented through the age groups, or at least someone that was never one of the top guys. But slowly I've chipped away to the point that, winning a medal at the Olympics, I think, is a realistic goal, and a goal that I'd be stupid if I wasn't kind of trying to achieve.
For those that follow your career and see your success, what do you think is a piece of the puzzle of the journey that normally goes unnoticed that most people don't know about?
I wish I could sit here and tell you about a secret that I've learned over the years about, like, this is what I've done and this is why I've had this success and other people don't. There really isn't. I've applied myself and made thousands of decisions every day, every week, every year that have led me to this point, and it's just been a consistent application of it. Now, yes, there are things we do in training that I think are really useful and I think are really effective. I can't point to any particular one. I think we apply ourselves really well, kind of year round, to make consistent progress. That are infinite sort of ways that I feel like between me and the support team I have, the way I get better. But really, it's a sense of just consistently applying yourself. Mistake some people often make, I suppose, is that everything they feel like they need to get 100% out of, particularly harder training sessions. It's about stacking, you'll have heard this before, kind of B plus days, kind of 85, 90% days. Yes, there are some people that have flashy workouts, and yes, I've seen some amazing stuff in training, but the people that I think have been consistently successful know that nothing they ever do in training is going to matter when it comes to race day. No one session, sorry, I should say, no one session is going to matter. It's about an accumulation over a period of months. That's what's going to come. That's what's going to allow a good performance to come to fruition. Most of the people that I know that have made it to this level, I don't think, smash every kind of session. They know that if they can get 6 months of good work, 4 months of good work, whatever you're kind of afforded, that's what's going to make a great performance. Not one flashy workout that you've done that indicates, oh, I'm in this kind of shape because I've done this session. No, I don't read into that at all. I've had some terrible sessions before great performances. I've had some great sessions before bad performances. It's more about what you can accumulate over a period of time leading into where you want to compete.
Final serious question for you, wrapping up our conversation today. For those who have listened to our conversation and look up to you and your success over the years, what would be the final takeaway message that you want to leave with our audience today?
I'd say that this sport, I'm assuming that most people that might be listening to this podcast are avid fans of the sport, or at least pursuing the sport themselves. I'd say the sport is really challenging. It's something that, you have to be pretty mentally tough to negotiate. It can also be incredibly rewarding because, as you know, it's so individual. As much as I've talked about doing it for people in my corner, and I have the mentality that I'm going in, wanting to represent my people well, my corner well. It's something that's individual, and you need to be enjoying it. There needs to be a reason why. So for me, I kind of found that out young. I loved the fact that I could apply myself over a period of time, set a plan, and then see, the results come to fruition at the end of it. It was so rewarding to set this plan and then it work, and then you get the performance, you get kind of what you deserve or what you've put in. So there needs to be a bit of a why. Mine's always been that, the sort of competing side of things. Some people really love the day to day, some people love the training, and then whatever performance they get out of it, great. But there needs to be a bit of a why if you're going to pursue this, I feel. And so there's been so many people I've done this sport with that never maybe really had a why. And, for them, that's totally fine. Like I think this sport is insane at times. The lengths you need to go just to get a little bit better. But as long as there's a why there and there's a reason why you're doing it, a reason you're enjoying it, I think it's brilliant. And I love competing. I love race day, and all the work I do in training makes that worth it. So if you have a why, don't don't question why you're doing this. Keep doing it.
Love that. Love that piece of advice. Neil, final question for you. The question I ask every single guest on every single episode. If you had Gordon Ramsay coming over to your house for dinner, what would you choose to make for him?
What would I choose to make for him? Oh, that would be a lot of pressure, wouldn't it? I I do a roast chicken quite well, so it's become a thing that I've sort of been. I'm gonna really sound like a twat here, but I've sort of been famous for in Flagstaff, or at least among my training group, is what I mean here, is this like Cajun roast chicken that I do. In fact, it's my coach's favorite thing that he gets cooked. He's not much of a chef himself, but his girlfriend Courtney will often make it. It's something that I used to make when I was living with him. It's something I've made for other people on the team. So I would make my Cajun roast chicken. My coach Stephen always texts me whenever it's roast chicken night. He always sends me a picture, which I love. It's become a tradition for him too. So the fact that I've got other people copying my recipe on that, yeah, Cajun roast chicken is what I would make.
Big time, big time. Neil, really appreciate you carving out time for this conversation, specifically right before the big races, right before things heat up. Appreciate you sharing your story, the ups, the downs, everything in between. I'm going to be cheering for you in Paris. Keep crushing it, man.
Thank you, Dominic. Really appreciate you having me on. Thank you.